Hello, and welcome back to the #1 survival guide of the Cylinder. And today, we shall venture into the winding canyons of the Terracotta Desert. As you left the plains, you began to notice an extreme change in the scenery, as you are now seeing significantly more cactus, much less foliage, and a strange, brittle, sharp sandstone-like material lining the cliff edge. You had just entered the Terracotta Desert. And just like that, you spotted your first animal. It was an inland red iguana. Red iguanas, as a genus, are typically found closer to the coast, in coastal rainforests, or just forests. But this one isn't. Why is that? Well, back when the sweltering desert was entirely covered by an inland sea, a distant relative of this iguana lived in those coastal forests. And as the sea slowly began to dry up once again, they slowly had to adapt to an environment. And now today, they are seen as somewhat of an icon of the Terracotta Desert, even though they are very low on the food chain and get picked off by other animals very easily. As you continued walking down the path, you began to walk further down the cliff, further into the desert. Further down the path, you suddenly noticed a group of small mammals dart into the foliage. It was a family of cactus deer. Cactus deer are some of the smallest deer on the Cylinder, and as their name suggests, their diet is mainly made up of cactus and dead bodies, as these deer are much more into scavenging than their woodland counterparts. After walking on the path for quite some time, you finally made it to the bottom of the canyon, and off in the distance, you saw a large storm cloud. But as you were staring at the storm cloud, your eyes slowly adjusted back to the desert floor, and you saw two large furry ears perking up out of the grass. It was a burrow bear. The burrow bear is a small burrow-dwelling species of bear that uses its large claws like shovels to dig out its burrows. It also possesses very large ears that it not only uses to sense the smallest of noises, but it also uses as temperature regulation in the heat. As for what it eats, it is mainly an omnivore, and primarily eats earthworms, various types of seasonal herbs, cactus fruit, and arachnids. Speaking of arachnids, as you turned your head, you saw a large rock scorpion clinging to the cliff edge. Rock scorpions are also very closely related to the iron scorpions of the sweltering desert, and share their scavenging lifestyle. You continued walking, and eventually you made it to a much more open area of desert. But as you did, you began to smell the strong smell of dust in the air, and as you did, you began to hear the sound of heavy footfall in the distance. It was a stampeding herd of grand horn cows. Grand horn cows appear to have a set of 4 large horns on their head, which is strange as most bovine normally only have 2 horns. And that's because their bottom set of horns are actually tusks, and are actually, in reality, their back molars protruding from their mouth. And one way you can tell that their bottom horns are actually tusks is that the females of grand horn cows do not actually possess their large top horns. However, they do possess their bottom tusks, and oftentimes on females they will be much larger than the male tusks, which they use to fight off predators as well as forage for food. And as for what they eat, they mainly consume different types of grass, as well as root vegetables, herbs, and even some species of fungus, as well as lichen. Suddenly, the ground beneath you gave way, and you fell about 5 feet down into an underground river. But when you finally stood up and took in your surroundings, you suddenly saw something moving, scurrying away in the shadows of the cave. It was a rain armadillo. Rain armadillos are a somewhat average-sized armadillo that are entirely subterranean and use their tongue as a sensory organ to navigate their environment, and primarily get their food and water from underground rivers, which they find by sensing vibrations in the ground when digging their tunnels. But the reason why they are called rain armadillos is because when it rains in the desert, the underground rivers that they use as a lifeline, and as well as their burrows, fill up with water, causing them to need to go to the surface. But when they do this, it leaves them wide open to predators, making rainstorms the most dangerous migrations they have to endure in their entire life. And so, when the first eastern pioneers came to the Terracotta Desert, they named this armadillo accordingly. As you explored the cave, you began to hear the sound of rushing water behind you as well as rain pelting the ground above you. As you did, you panicked and suddenly ran straight into the darkness of the cave, and somehow actually managed to find your way out. But it was already too late, as the area you just exited into was already filling with water, fast. But then it was the lightning crack of a yellow-maned thunderbird. While yellow-maned thunderbirds aren't the largest of the thunderbirds, they are the most likely to hunt humans, as they are about the same height as them. Yellow-maned thunderbirds also share a very similar lifestyle to wolves, meaning that they are primarily pack hunters, living in a family dynamic where the father of the children is at the top of the group, and all the children are lower than him. And then, when the children get old enough to start their own family, they will be kicked out of the group. Thunderbirds, while they may look like a species of vulture, are actually close related to eagles, and only look like a vulture as an adaptation to the hot environment of the deserts, but also as an adaptation to stop them from overheating when using their electricity weapon. How does their electricity weapon work, you may ask? Well, it is a massive blast of energy sourced from that organ you see under their neck, in a similar fashion to dragons, however, using a different chemical reaction. They can use this powerful weapon as both a defense mechanism and a tool when hunting. And during the rain, it makes it even more powerful, as it can spread across the land much more easily and faster. And this is unfortunately what kills you. As you walked through the ankle-deep rainwater, a thunderbird watching from above spotted you and used its attack on you. And as it did, it instantly fried your brain, killing you in an instant. And that now brings us to the end of this chapter of the Survival Guide.